Hello, today is February 29th, 2024. I'm meeting today with Mr. Richard Hough at his home in Windsor, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Richard, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
I was born during the Hoover administration, believe it or not, August 26, 1930. So that makes me 93 and a half right now, which is kind of amazing. Although most of my friends who are still living are in the 96 to 98 range. It's amazing.
Wow.
I was born in Warren, Pennsylvania. That's the northeastern portion of the state. Where the forests still are, but I was raised in the suburbs of Philadelphia, in Lansdowne, Lansdowne, in Delaware County, one of the counties that surround urban Philadelphia. I went to high school there, college at Syracuse University, and in the summer between my sophomore and junior years, I got a job with the Forest Service in Idaho, so out in the Bitterroot Mountains in a tent camp, picking ribes, and I'll have to explain that because it makes no sense. That's wild gooseberries or wild currants, and a very strange disease of trees, particularly the white pine, which is the most valuable of all the lumber species. This spore goes not from a sick tree to another healthy tree and infects it. It has to go to an intermediate host. And the intermediate host are these wild currants or wild gooseberries. And so the Forest Service has tried everything possible to eradicate the intermediate hosts. And they had hundreds and hundreds of, thousands of camps, not camps, but guys out digging out gooseberry bushes.
Now, how'd you get the job? Was it related to your major or what?
Well, my dad was a research forester with the U.S. Forest Service for over 40 years.
Okay.
So he probably heard about it first, and my brother and I headed out there. The reason that I bring this up is simply because on June 25th, 1950, which is when the DPRK came across the ROK lines, we hardly had I think one guy had a portable radio, and finally we heard that there was something going on in Korea, but really didn't know much of anything. So I kind of put it to the side. Got back to Syracuse and started my junior year. The draft was in effect at that time, and I knew that I would be 1A if I left college. But I had a draft board that pretty much said, if you stay in school, it doesn't matter what your major is. You don't have to be in engineering or something like that. I was an English literature major. We'll just postpone your draft date until you graduate. So I had 2 years more at Syracuse. But in June 1952, my time was up. And I had gone to many different recruiting offices and tried to find out what are the possibilities. And it was at that time you could join the Army for 3 years as an enlistee, or you could be drafted for 2, or you could go Air Force, Marines, Navy, and I think it was 4. Air Force may have been 5 years for all I know. And I had no interest in those. And my background in terms of World War I had an uncle who got a DSC and his arm blown off practically with the 28th Division in the Argonne. And he was my role model all my life. He was a marvelous, marvelous man. And anyway, I'd never thought of trying to do draft dodging or anything like that. It was just, I knew I had to go in the military. And one of the recruiters told me about the ASA. And the key thing here was that at that time, and I don't know whether it's still true or not, you could indicate, I would like to be an Army baker, I would like to be a truck driver, or that kind of thing. I don't know whether they ever honored that for people who want to be bakers or truck drivers. But in the ASA, they said, okay, if you're ASA, you will be ASA. We won't bunch you. The only thing is you have to get a top secret clearance to handle the material we did. So I chose to do 3 years. I was RA, which is a regular Army, 13447. Oh, I suddenly forgot it, my serial number. And they were good about it. I mean, they did honor that we were. I'll jump to basic training, actually.
Sure.
Because at that time, I think basic infantry was 16 weeks. But they had also 8-week basics. And we were put in 8 weeks, along with people who had difficulties or whatever, and weren't going to be frontline troops. So anyway, you wanted background, didn't you?
No.
What else in the background?
That's
Father was a researcher, as I told you, with the U.S. Forest Service.
And you said mentioned you had a brother. Any other siblings?
I had 3 brothers. Eventually, I was the oldest, and then the next one was drafted into the Navy, if you can believe such a thing. Actually, it was a case of he was drafted and they lined them all up. And, we need 3 for the Navy. Allen, Zabriskie. And Walter was thinking, well, I'm safe. How do you pronounce it? Kind of thing, you know. Yeah. So he went Navy, and they made him a surveyor, and he was sent to Enewetak, or one of the atolls, you know. And that's what he did the whole time, if you can imagine. Right. And my third brother, Stephen, I don't know whether he enlisted or drafted. I really don't. I think he enlisted, but anyway, he was in missiles out of Fort Bliss, I think, Texas. And anyhow, he put in his time too. Our third brother, we were 3, but then the fourth one was 14 years younger than I. And he didn't have to worry about that at the time.
So where did you go off to do your basic training then?
Fort Boom 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 Boom. I'm thinking it's Patton's Knox.
Fort Knox.
Fort Knox.
Okay. Yeah. And how was that transition going from civilian life into military life for you? Was it much of an adjustment for you?
No, I had a pretty good idea what was coming. So, I mean, I can tell you a couple things here. Mm-hmm. I went in to the school called Arsenal in Philadelphia on Friday, June 27th. And there were 5 other ASA guys and 14 total, all heading for Meade. And they put us on the train, the B&O train to Baltimore. And from there, it was a bus, a Greyhound bus, over to Fort Knox. And then we were in Fort Knox for probably 8 days, 9 days. And interestingly, they were flying us to Fort Knox and from Baltimore International Airport on something called Resort Airlines. God, it was it looked like it had been through many resorts. It was a terrible old thing, and two motors, thankfully. I wondered, am I going to end up dead with the plane going by? I won't even get to Fort Knox.
Yeah, right.
In Fort Knox Basic, I've written a book, and I should just show you. This tells everything.
Oh, right, okay. Uh-huh.
And what I've looked at is a little diary that I kept. I got these, I don't know, Jot a Day or something like that, it's called, in 1951. And I thought, oh, I don't really want this. It was a gift. And then I just wrote down when exams were and when different sporting events were going to be, you know. And then finally I began to think, well, shoot, I might as well write about my day, like Eleanor Roosevelt, my day. And there's not much room here, but it's amazing how much detail you can get.
Oh, what a...
So I kept these going. These are my Korea.
Wow. What a treasure trove right there.
And the other big thing was I kept constant contact with my mother. I wrote a letter probably every week to 10 days, and she was just as faithful, and she kept every one of my letters. And they have been incredible, because that's where I would bitch and moan and groan about how miserable I was, that kind of thing. I don't even remember most of it. but you know, typical actions. So anyway, what was Basic like? I wrote about three things. I mean, I have all the detail you could ever want or not want. Take me a moment here because this is Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I wrote about massive salt intake. It was July, and you know, you get out there and you have to march for umpteen miles or do push-ups and everything else. And our particular cycle was very easy compared to the normal, I think, because in the cycle previous to us, at least one guy died of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, I don't know which. Maybe it was more than one, and apparently a whole bunch of them had just sort of fallen by the wayside. So our officers and non-coms were told, if anybody goes down on your watch, you are going into the brig. Well, they called it the what is it in the Army? The equivalent, anyway, of military prison, and you are going there fast, kind of thing. So they they were very careful. That fact hung over our training cadre like a pall. Rumors circulated in our ranks to the effect that if any of us were to succumb to the heat and humidity, the officers and non-coms were to be court-martialed with no mitigating circumstances being entertained. The direct result was our unit was forced to ingest truly massive doses of salt tablets, salt pills, when we were in the field, to the point that our green fatigue jackets developed white stains under the armpits and down the back, you know. So it was green and white, the covers of the New York Jets, I guess. But anyway, one memorable day, we came to a sizable stream. He says, "Take your clothes off, everybody. Nothing. Get in that water. Have water fights. Enjoy." Really? The second thing, well, I witnessed a non-fatal lynching, which I don't know whether I'll tell about or not. But anyway, they were so desperate to get people in the Army, and remember, this was the culls or the ASA type. But they had one guy in our company who couldn't carry his rifle in the normal fashion on his shoulder because he was so hunchback that we had to take a strap and strap it over him, so he strapped with the rifle riding back there. Another guy in the cot next to me, the bed next to me in the barracks, disappeared one day, and he came back hours later. They had taken every single tooth out of his head in one fell operation. Horrible, horrible. I couldn't imagine. I mean, a lot of these kids were from Appalachia. This was East Coast areas. And they did have bad teeth. It was sad to see some, but to have everything pulled in one day was too much. So those are a couple things.
Yeah. And then you finished up basic
And they put me on another airplane and went off to Massachusetts. Now, if you're in the ASA, nobody ever told me this, but if you're going to be an intercept radio operator, I think that they sent you to Fort Gordon, Georgia. I think if you're in any technical kind of sense, like a teletype operator or teletype repairman or had anything to do with phones, they went to Fort Gordon. If you were chosen to go to the Army Language School at Monterey, California, that was the plum that drew an awful lot of guys into the ASA. It was probably the greatest language training center in the world at that time. They had virtually every language known to mankind. My buddy who was with me on that trip to Meade ended up at the Army ALS, the Army Language School, and he was put in Chinese. But you were there for a whole year, day after day after day after day after day. So you really became very fluent in Polish or Serbian or whatever they were needing at the time.
Now, you said you had chosen the ASA. And once in the ASA, did you get to choose your field, or did you test for it, or they just
Test.
Okay.
Test. That was probably, as far as I'm concerned, the most important day of my whole service.
Oh, really?
Well, they could have said, "You're an intercept operator." Hour after hour after hour, shift after shift after shift for 3 years. I mean, good God, I don't know how people didn't go nuts. Or you're, like I mentioned, possibly a technician, but I was sent to Crippy school, cryptology. I became an 1808, which is cryptologic analytics specialist. And that was Fort Devens, Massachusetts. So the people who were going to be traffic, what did they call them, TAs, traffic somethings, or cryptographers, went to Devens. Traffic means that you get all these messages and you try to, okay, this must be a headquarters unit sending out to battalions or something like that, the messages, and you build the networks and you see who is sending what to whom. You don't know what's in it. That's up to us, the Crippies. I think I would have wished, I kind of wish I had been a TA. I would have enjoyed that more.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is that networks, you build these things up, and then all of a sudden, it's gone. This is normal practice in military intelligence kind of circles. You change all the call signs, you change the frequencies, and so you have to keep listening, and develop again, this is calling this to this, but it's new. But you're turning the dial. If you're one of the intercept operators, trying to find out where signals are coming from that you're interested in. And sometimes, if there's a sloppy guy, this is Chinese in my case, and he might drag out his dashes instead of dash, boom. And so they tell me that the intercept operators can figure, there he is again, this guy, that they knew by the way he was signaling, and therefore they could hone in, this, we know who he is, so that helped the TAs figure out, what that guy was sending now compared to what he was sending before. It's a game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
But the ASA is also listening into our signalers. It listens into telephone conversations. It listens into everything. So I could have been, something like that. For instance, this is just hearsay. Everything in ASA, I'll tell you, is need to know. Everything is absolutely compartmentalized. I was working in Seoul, Korea, in a former high school, and we had rooms. Somewhere they were working on the Korean language texts. I don't even know where they were in that building. I didn't know where our TAs were. We were cryptography, and that was it. We went to our room and sat at the desks and looked at numbers, nothing but numbers. There you go, crazy.
Wow.
So, anything that I know about other activities at ASA is stuff that was slipped by somebody else, For instance, apparently they were tapping the generals' lines. A lot of the generals were in Japan, and they would come over on the last day of the month and stay the first day of the next month and get 2 months full pay as though it's combat pay. Isn't that terrible? But they mostly had, a lot of them had mistresses, and so somebody was listening in, and if he says, "Well, honey, I can't see you this weekend. We're having a big push on the front," or something like that. It's dumb. And he would be hung up by his toes. You don't do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I technically don't know much of anything about ASA because we were so compartmentalized. I didn't know that the Navy has cryptographers. I didn't know that the Marines, I don't know about Marines. I know the Air Force does. And that was the Navy part was only by chance. I was sent to Okinawa because we were getting some interesting messages that were very repetitive. We didn't know what they were, so they were coming out of the Chinese coast, and they sent a couple of us south to Okinawa for a week or so, 10 days, and we were to try to figure out what was going on. And some guy breezes in who's a Navy cryptographer. I didn't know that. He says, that's the weather report. They're given the temperature, the wind conditions, the cloud cover and all that kind of stuff, but it's all coded.
Yeah, okay.
So it's very repetitive, obviously.
Yeah. So how long was your schooling then there at Evans, roughly?
Well, I could give you the actual dates, but it was basically, I think, November through something like March or something like that. So it was about
5-6 months.
Yeah. Here, I can give you the poop. September the 8th to February 24th. I told you too far, the low there. And one of the things I wrote about in this book is the casual company. Do you know anything about casual company?
I don't.
Well, I came to know casual companies, or also called holding companies, rather intimately on a number of occasions. In fact, every time I arrived at a new base, my initial home, more like hellhole, was a holding company. The rationale for the existence of such units makes sense. When a new man is assigned to a permanent role, permanent quarters, and issued equipment necessary to carry out his new assignment, he nowadays has to stay somewhere so that the proper authorities can keep tabs on him until he's called to permanent. And in our case, you had to be cleared by the FBI as top secret. And some of these poor guys were in holding company for months. I was very, very fortunate. My clearance came through rather quickly. And so I was released to a teaching unit.
Did back home was your family and friends wondering what the FBI was doing sniffing around?
You better believe it. All the ladies in the Lansdowne Methodist Church were contacted. What is Richard doing? Oh man. I'll have to put this here because this is fun clear. So anyway, what happens to you is, and I'll give you a list. You are the workforce for the whole camp. Shoveling dirt, liquid tar, mud, digging shallow ditches, raking leaves too early for snow, cleaning, mopping, sweeping, not only the mess halls, of course, but also such places as the classrooms and the chapel, working on the firing range, also repairing fences, working in dispensary, filing records and filing records and filling gargle bottles, working in the supply room, working in the warehouse, crating clothing, loading trucks, delivering supplies to different points in the fort. In other words, you're a grunt.
Yeah.
And I hurt my back because they were 4x4. What do you call those big trucks? Were the workhorses.
Oh,
I got to drive those myself, actually,
yeah.
in Korea. But the point is, they had the canvas tops,
Okay.
and they were low
Yeah.
for somebody to come through with a 50-pound bag of potatoes or a 45-pound bag of rice or whatever, with the day's rations. In and out, and you bend over and bend
Sure.
over, and boy, your back snaps pretty quickly. So it was not a nice place to be. And so I wrote about it because my records are pretty good about what transpired with my little diaries. So in Devon's, it was really interesting because the classroom building was, I think, 3 stories brick, and you had to have identification picture and card, around your neck. And that was new to me. I mean, that's so common in virtually every industry nowadays, but back then it was different.
Right.
You had to show it to an MP at the gate to get in. And you just went to your own classroom and were there for hours and came back. But they marched you to the classroom. If I can find it, I'll tell you a little funny thing that happened. It's hard to find things in here because I have so much.
Sure.
I did get away while I was in holding to, would you believe such a bill as this, a fantastic program? And Boston, Sarah Vaughan, Nat King Cole, and the Stan Kenton Band. Oh, God, that was so good. And when we had a lot of time off, so. Okay, here it is. I found this little, just one moment in the day. We were marching four abreast, and we were actually slipping, sliding, stumbling our way to lunch after some freezing rain had hit during the night. Anyhow, I noticed the staff car of General Myers was coming toward us, and just as he got to our platoon, the second platoon, I saw him roll down his back window and lean out. I thought perhaps he was going to compliment the troops on. Instead, he screamed, "Get the goddamn troops over on the right side of the road!" Needless to say, we marched two abreast. And the poor lieutenant was just waving every car by feverishly. Oh, man. Yeah. I was very close to General Myers as he taught us how to act. Oh, man. I can't tell you a thing about what we learned or how we learned it or what went on. It was all, you didn't take anything home. No papers, nothing.
Sure.
It was just, you worked in the classroom, and I guess maybe your mind kept working, but you were forbidden to carry anything out.
Now,
I probably would have been in trouble if they found out I was keeping this little diary.
well, that was one of the questions I was eventually going to ask you about it, because I know back in like World War II that wasn't allowed, and then particularly in your particular case being in intelligence, if it was, I was wondering about that myself.
Oh, you can read page after page after page, and there's nothing. Juice the intelligence part of it.
Well, now let me ask you this: I've interviewed other people in various forms of intelligence over the years. When you would have time off and say went into Boston to see a show or something, did you have to tell them, or did you have to
sign out
and tell them where you were going? Did they have to know where you were at all times? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I don't think so.
Okay.
We had pretty good freedom of action. You know? I mean, we could go to dances in the nearby town. We could go to Boston. I went with other guys to a football game of Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass. We didn't have tickets. We got to the gate, and this guy saw these sorry guys in uniform. He says, go ahead. So there was a few little perks like that. Went up the coast to Maine at one point. Had lobster dinner.
Yeah.
So and I had a day off or so, and we went to hitchhike to New York, and it was the first time for a lot of people, to get I've got a great picture of myself, with the New York skyscrapers. So no, we had quite a bit of time.
Okay.
That was true in Korea and Japan as well.
Okay.
So
you finish up schooling. Take your story from there then.
okay, we had exercise after exercise after exercise. It's like puzzling all the time, And they kept scores on how we had done day after day. I mean, there was a running score, and I was near the top, but not at the top. But they said the top three are going to go special duty, and I was third place behind Smutch and Bartley, and I was kind of not doing as well toward the end. I thought, oh, I'm going to lose it. But somehow I scraped through.
Wow.
And what they did was they sent us three, and probably from every other class as well, to NSA. NSA is the top cryptologic place in the United States. At that time, they were building their headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, where it is a monster building, I understand, with thousands and thousands of employees. That's where we've had some bad espionage, or people I would shoot personally. But anyway, it gives you an idea of the importance of different things. Smuts was first in the class. He was heading for Harvard as a classicist, Latin and Greek kind of thing. He had already finished Bowdoin and master's degree. And that was it. A lot of the guys in ASA had already finished college, as I did, or master's degrees. I don't know whether there were many or any who had PhDs, but there probably were a few.
Wow.
So Smuts was sent to NSA, Russian traffic. Bartley was number 2. He was Korean traffic. And I was dubbed for Chinese.
Wow.
It didn't matter whether you knew a word of Chinese or anything about it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So you work with linguists, but we are interested in breaking all these numbers into what turns out to be Chinese.
Wow.
I'll tell you something, there's no secret about this, but you must wonder how in the heck do they send coded messages with with the characters, with the ideograms,
right.
And they don't. There was a CTC, was the Chinese Telegraphic Code. This was commercial. It was partly a result of the work of missionaries way back, and or people in the business world, to set up something so that they could send messages in Chinese over the telegraph. So you get a page, and you have 10 columns and you have 10 rows, okay? And if at the number you have row 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, this kind of thing, and you go down the side, 0, 1, 0, 2, 10. So you could have a character that was 0, 0, 1, 2, 3 zeros, 0, 0, 0, 1. And that actually was 1 in Chinese. I mean, the character for 1. It didn't continue like that. But the point is, you could look up 5275, page where the 50s were, 52, and then follow down, and then follow over, and there's the character. But we didn't do that. I mean, we didn't have to do it. We just had to break out the fact that 5275 was being sent in part of in a coded message. By the way, I was taught in Devon's, practically everything we did was cipher. And cipher is alphabetic, so Bartley, when he went to Korean, he would have a good idea, of what was going on, because Korean is alphabetic.
Oh.
It's the only Far Eastern language that is. And Russian, of course, is Russian. So they would be in cipher too. Cipher is taking the alphabetic letters, and you could do either two things. That if you're sending a message, it could be transposed. In other words, if it was a Z, an H, it might end up as something else completely. But it could still be H, but it's somewhere in a matrix that changes it, So it's out of place, is what I'm trying to say. Or substitution, the H becomes a Z, or the H becomes a J, or something like that, which is probably more common. But that didn't do me any good.
Yeah, right.
With the Chinese. Fun. The glory days.
So how long were you then down at Fort Meade
Well,
area
no,
for that school?
they hadn't built Fort Meade. They were building it.
Oh, okay.
So, at least for the Army part, and maybe the others as well, there was on the grounds of Fort Myers. Fort Myers is where the Pentagon is. Fort Myers is where the 3rd Infantry, the Honor Guard is, the U.S. Army Band, all sorts of special places, housing for generals. But there was a girls' finishing school. It was called Arlington Hall. What a wonderful name. And anyway, ASA had taken over that. And this was where the high-level people were who were working on Chinese, the high-level people who were working on Russian, and so forth. I mean, I never saw Smutch again until much, much later in Japan, when we were both stationed there. But the point is that Arlington Hall was getting all the traffic, the messages from the big outposts in the Far East and everywhere else in the world. I did learn where some of the great, I don't know what to call them, receiving stations were, where you had so many different antennae and so many different things. For instance, Asmara was in the Horn of Africa. Some of them had really neat names. Vint Hill Ranch. Two Rock Ranch and Vint Hills something or other. I mean, they had kind of like clouded or coded names for the units. Anyway, where were we? How long was I there? I could give you the precise dates.
Or just roughly too.
Well, here, hang on. Well, I arrived in Korea in August. I was on the ship across in July. I was still in Devon's. Oh, that's because the pictures aren't total. I don't have any from Arlington Hall. Anyway. But it was, really, really neat to know. You didn't learn anything there except what you were working on.
Wow.
Were actually codes that they had already broken and that kind of stuff. So, anyway, that was wonderful duty for me because my grandfather and my grandmother had lived in Washington. My dad was born in Washington. His brother was still in Washington. I had other cousins and, a lot of families. So we had been in Washington many times, coming from Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Grandpa, by the way, was the head curator of the Department of Ethnology and Anthropology at the Smithsonian. And when it came mandatory date to be retired, which I think was 65 at that point, they had a special dispensation for him to stay on for a few more years. He was considered that important. Anyways, and there was a lot of time off. And so I took full advantage. I mean, I'd go in here and you'd be embarrassed at the riches of things that I got to do. And I'll just tell you one. You remember the Constitution Hall is where Marian Anderson was barred by the DAR. Constitution Hall was owned by the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. But they did allow concerts in there, probably if there were no blacks in the orchestra. But anyway, the Philadelphia Orchestra, for instance, came one time. We had free tickets, and I sat in the box right on the stage. And it was Eugene Ormandy was conducting. And oh my gosh. So I was seeing a side view of Normandy, not his back, but side view. And he was conducting a Bach toccata and fugue, and God, just the lines, and he was singing with it the whole time, and he was driving, he's trying to get fortissimo, kind of thing, and the veins in his neck just popped out, he was so intense. Yeah. It was a wonderful experience to see that, because I like classical music. Mm. Anyway, had some leave and then flew to Camp Stoneman in California, Contra Costa County, Pittsburgh, California. And after a few days there, they woke us up at 4 a.m. and took us on trucks down to the dock. And there was a huge ferry boat. I don't know how many people, but I would imagine it was 500, 600 guys with their duffel bags and everything. And we crowded onto that and then went slowly down through Sassoon Bay and then the upper parts of the California, San Francisco Bay, and to a place called Fort Mason. And that was the Army transportation place in San Francisco, and there was a troop ship lined there. And you get off the ferry, Red Cross is giving you a donut and a cup of coffee, and then you climb the gangplank up to the deck of the troop ship, and then down to where the troops were. Where the bunks were, and it's 4 deep. There are 1,000 Air Force men, though, that were going on that same ship, which is amazing. And for some reason, they had to do the KP. I can't believe that. I still remember that. Oh, shoot. I have so much stuff here. It's just pathetic. We haven't even gotten to Korea yet.
You're right.
But here's the troop ship. One picture is of me, and I'm wearing ODs, even though that's the wool, even though it's summer, But I was on guard duty every third day or something like that. And most of the time we were lounging like this, in fatigues. And it was a nice wooden deck, and it was wonderful.
How was that crossing? Going to sea, did you get your sea legs? And particularly, I hear the waters just outside of San Francisco are pretty rough.
Yeah, and I think I can't prove this, and I don't think I have it in my. I think they fed us a liver dinner just before, and God, then we hit the boom, boom. Boom, those big rollers as you go out a little bit further toward the Farallon Islands. And it was puke everywhere. Guys were puking down the stairs, and I didn't, but I came awfully close.
Oh, jeez.
Here, the ship, by the way, it had about 1,000 soldiers, airmen, and many dependents.
Really, huh?
And they were up in the nice class, and we were all down below. And that's why they had guard duty. I was to keep the dependents from us and us from the dependents, right. Kind of thing. That was funny. That was the Navy ship Sultan, S-U-L-T-A-N, named after a general. It was a pretty nice former passenger ship.
Okay.
And that thing over there is a certificate that everybody got that they had crossed the 180th meridian. And so they had all sorts of festivities, King Neptune came on board and everything. But we were kind of silly. This doesn't show up very well, I'm afraid, but these are all ASA guys heading for Japan.
How long did the take you to get there? How long was the trip, roughly?
I could give you the absolute but I don't have it right here.
Yeah.
It was about 10 days, I think. But it was very pleasant
Oh, good.
overall. Anyway, about 3 days out of Yokohama, which was the port that we were going to, it was announced over the loudspeakers that the armistice, the truce had been signed.
Oh, really?
And I don't think there was wild celebration because a lot of us weren't going into combat anyhow. But also, it was a very guarded, I don't know, things had gone so badly in the talks between the Chinese and North Koreans and the UN. It's almost 2 years, and they hadn't decided anything. They just argued and argued and argued. So the fact that they signed something, do you really believe them? Because it's been broken, or, they make promises and then it's broken. And it was a terrible process because guys were getting killed, and some of the worst fighting was in those 2 years. It was very bad at the beginning. The first year was awful, and the losses were awful. But getting up on those ridges, and the Chinese would launch an attack with bugles and come streaming up the slope, and you shot them down, but they knock you off the ridge, and then you Americans have to go the other way up the ridge, and so it's just like killing fields, know. So no matter how much I bitched about little things, it didn't hold a candle to what I was missing. So anyway, got to Yokohama. And it's kind of interesting. They took all the dependents off first, and they were met by, let's say, generals and different people whose family was coming over, put in staff cars, and off they go. And then they unload the Air Force, and we were standing there waiting. We were the last off. And I don't need to tell you, specifics, but AS has a big headquarters, ASAFE or ASA PAC. They changed their name halfway through, but it was ASA Far East. And so they were controlling or feeding stuff back and forth to the Philippines, to Guam, to Okinawa, to places in Japan. I mean, it was a whole network. And how do I know that? Because from Korea, I got to be the manager of a basketball team of ASAers. I hope I can find this because I had it just a moment ago. Nope, it's going to be back this way, sorry. Here. There's Richard, the manager, and there's our team. And to get them together to practice at all, I had to get the truck. I had to get the truck go ahead, and I'd go around to the 322nd, to these different outposts, and get some of the ones, and bring them in. And look at our uniforms; they were really nice. Yeah. I was the one that got those uniforms because I went over to the headquarters for the 8th Army, which was all Korea, all the divisions in Korea, about 10 different divisions at the end. I went over to their recreation guy, and I says, "We're going to Japan for a tournament. We don't have any uniforms. We hardly had anything. And could I borrow them?" And they said, "Sure, go ahead." So we were outfitted, playing versus Kyoto or versus Misawa, Japan, or versus Okinawa or whatever, But the guy who was the head of ASAPAC, as he would see the dossiers, they would pass over his desk. He'd see, "Oh, there's a potential athlete. And so he would pull them. I mean, maybe they were supposed to go to the South or something. So the team for Tokyo was so much better than us, than the rest. But I had some really good guys on my team. And we came in second, and that was pretty good from about a 10-team tournament, I think. So did I get from Korea to Japan?
Well,
and back again?
you'd been. We left off. You landed in Japan. Is that just a stopping point, or so then reboarded and went down to Korea?
I went to ASFI and reported in. I'm here, kind of thing. And then they sent me on the, let's see, photo group 501st. I was sent to the 501st Com Recon, communications, reconnaissance. In other words, what is reconnaissance? It's going out, trying to probe the enemy, find out the soft spots wherever. And here's our gate, and I'll tell you what's written on it, besides the 501st. What you see here, leave here. What you hear here, leave here. In other words, as you went out under that gate, that's what you saw. That's the last thing you saw. In other words, God damn it, nothing to any horror or anybody else that you see. We did have a number of Koreans who worked on our base, but I don't know how they cleared them. They never got in the actual. It was the top Japanese boys' high school before the war. There are a lot of pockmarks here. Bullets hit it.
Yeah.
And we had this great big compound with a lot of outbuildings and so forth, and a gym that didn't have a roof, or at least not much of a roof. And this place out here where we could play soccer or have softball or that sort of stuff. It was cushy.
Yeah.
And when I went back to there, it had been, as I said, the #1 high school for Japanese, for Koreans. And when I went back, I was wondering, was it going to be a high school again? It's part of the National Library now.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
So that building has been repurposed many times. Now, here's a young man. He's a Korean national, and he's sitting on a box, and he's in the room. There were two buildings for that former school. One we used for classrooms, or workrooms, I should say, and plus administration, plus the dining hall, plus the dispensary, whatever. But the rest of us, we're in the second building, and it was partitioned off in old classrooms. And you can see that there are cots here, and this was our houseboy.
Oh, okay.
So you talk about cushy. I mean, he made the beds, he cleaned the thing, he made the stove was working and everything else. And we called him Pat. Anyway, he's wearing a new outfit here that we bought him. We appreciated his great attitude and his work ethic so much that we actually got a Sears Roebuck catalog. And he got, as you can see, a new shirt, yellow, and his new pants and everything. He's just smiling over it. But this is what you saw in the streets. These are what you call Kuji boys. These are probably orphans, and they may have one parent left. But they run in packs, and they're looking for garbage in the streets to eat, because...
What was Pat's situation? Was he an orphan as well, or?
No, I think he had a family.
Okay.
So we were told, watch out for the Kuji boys, because what they'll do is they'll sort of trick you. If you have a camera, and I'm wearing on a strap here, that's fine. And the fellow's making all sorts of gestures or asking or begging and something in front of you. Meanwhile, somebody's behind you and cuts the strap and off with the camera they go.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, it was cat and mouse, and we were sometimes the mouse. But you felt terribly sorry for them. Let me show you what Seoul looked like at that time.
Right.
Either of these two pictures. That was transportation with an ox, and that was devastation. The whole area of the city was just absolutely leveled because the armies went through Seoul 4 times.
Yeah.
4 times.
Yeah.
The North Koreans the first time. The Americans after the invasion that MacArthur pulled off at Incheon. So that's number 2. And then the Chinese came in, and they pushed us all the way back through Seoul to the south. And then finally, there was kind of a meat grinder movement forward, and we pushed the Chinese out. But the city suffered, terribly. These, by the way, in this picture, those are cardboard houses. They had found old boxes and put them together, so it was a whole huge slum of nothing but cardboard boxes to live in.
And you were more in, I guess, urban setting, but every Korean veteran I ever interviewed always talked about the honeypots.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's in Japan too.
Yeah.
Human manure.
Yeah.
By the way, here's the old North Gate to the city of Seoul, and there's a big sign on it. Welcome, Vice President Richard M. Nixon. Yeah, people would come over after the war was, after it was over and parade around. But let me show you one picture that I'm very proud of. I would go to everything. This fellow, it was the only one living in South Korea who was one of the leaders of the revolt against the Japanese in 1919. World War I was over, and there were high hopes for all peoples who had been, under the thumb of somebody, but the Koreans thought, this is our opportunity. So they had what they called the Mansei movement. It was absolutely peaceful. It wasn't to the streets like the French, at the Revolution or something. And the Japanese response was just absolutely horrific. I just put down here, the Japanese response, massacres, imprisonments, repression, all over Korea. So they really put their thumb down. That was 1919. There was one man still alive in North Korea who was one of the leaders. But anyway, our general, they had a big to-do. I'll just give you this book. General Maxwell Taylor, his name, and his Korean interpreter addressing a crowd at the National Capitol, commemorating the 35th anniversary of the March 1st, 1919 Mansei movement. And that sign up there says 35th, probably anniversary. Anyway, Korea, I want to show you one map. Oh, here's riding on a C-124 Globemaster. You sit along the side. And I think the most scared I was ever in my whole life was on that thing, because we were flying out of Tachikawa Air Force Base. And I don't know, I'll have to, maybe 2 weeks prior, a C-124, which was destined, or at least its destination was going to be Korea, lifted up off and fell to the ground and killed everybody.
Oh.
everybody. I think it was 164 or something like that. And it was the world record at that time. Subsequently, we've had just, air disaster after air disaster, and the numbers are horrific. But that was enough to scare me, because
Sure.
there was the same plane, the same route, the same seating and everything else. And I sweat so badly that it was just running down my sides. So we flew into, the one I was on was called the Billy Beef Express. It's written, you know how people used to write the names of either their girlfriends
You're right,
or
yeah.
on the nose of the plane. Stupid thing. Anyway, I'll just jump to the most memorable and
Sure.
important part of my time in Korea.
You bet.
Besides, I have to find this one stupid map here, because it tells you a lot about me. This is a 1 to 250,000 AMS Army Map Service map, and on it I've plotted places that I went to. And for somebody who wasn't even a corporal at that time, most of the time, off to Incheon, that was to see the Indian troops leaving. Off to the 326 Intercept Company, off to the 329th, another intercept company. This is so unbelievable. I got orders, I wangled orders to go see the 301st, which was over in the East Coast in different corps. And they said, yeah, we'll get you flying orders. So I was the sole passenger on an Army, like Piper Cub or something like that, flown across Korea.
Wow.
to land. It was really just for fun to see some guys I knew. I mean, I had no reason in the world to be there. But the big thing was this long stretch up here. This is Panmunjom.
Ooh.
Now, when things were going on, particularly the exchange of prisoners, they had road blocks, or they had checkpoints along that road, because they didn't want people like me to go up there. But some other ASAers had made it through, so I tried it. I had just been in Korea only maybe 3 weeks at that point, and I did it twice. So here I am. I was a private still. I didn't even have private first class at this point. And there was a viewing place at Freedom Village, and I climbed up on that same viewing place, and there were all colonels and majors and probably a general too. They just ignored me, which is fine, because I took pictures from up there. But here's a picture of me, and they're transporting a fellow over to helicopters for transporting, to take him to a major hospital, probably in Seoul, and from there to Korea, to hospitals in Japan. There's, you had MASH units, which are so famous. Because but this is the picture. Here's Richard Hough, no stripes, nothing. And Major General this, Major General that, Major General this, Major General that. And this tent was for, so I just, but this is my picture. Those are Chinese prisoners who have determined that they want to go back to Red China, or the Chaikon area. They're on army trucks, and they're stripping off the clothes. We gave them new clothes for the exchange. But there's blue clothing over there at the side of the road, which I can see. It's very small. And that was UN prisoners were dressed in the Chinese blue, and they stripped theirs off and threw them out the window. They were on ambulances. I don't know how they have ambulances with windows, but anyway, somehow they did it. So I got up into where the exchange was.
Now, what was your role up there for the exchange? Just to observe it, or you?
Well, let's say I was an observer.
This was just your own doing. This wasn't. You weren't ordered to go up there.
No. I just got leave and said I'm going to. And this is another guy. How we got into the actual end was I had passed a number of these checkpoints because, you're hitchhiking and maybe an officer would pick you up with his Jeep. And in one case, the guy did, who was, I think, a Marine captain or something like these. How come you guys are off duty? Well, sir, we work regular hours, like 8 to 5. 8 to 5? And we get Sundays off, and we get half the Saturday off. What? He was just dumbfounded. For the prisoners, I was standing right next to a guy, no insignia or anything, but that's Chicom. I mean, he's a People's Volunteer Army, PVA, Chinese. He could be an observer, he could be a reporter, he could be anything.
Yeah, right.
But there's what I'm trying to learn what they're saying.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But this is the real picture. It's a little kind of a Russian Jeep, I guess, and the North Korean officer and Chinese officers, a couple non-coms, and they escorted the trucks, which were built by Russia, in which the prisoners were. And here's one with his blue uniform, and an American major has a list provided by the Chinese with the people who were in there, And so these guys had to sit there until their name was called. It must have been just agony.
Yeah.
They're going to call my name and they're going to send me back and they're going to take me back to the prison camp. Oh, God, what is that? But then they would have to walk under this, which was called the Gate of Freedom. And it's just welcome, in Korean and also English. And the ambulance is parked back at that. And no matter whether you were able-bodied or whatever, you went into the ambulance. And the ambulance took you to Freedom Village, which was that monster building where they were stripped, or they stripped themselves, and deloused and showered and given new uniforms.
So what was the general condition of the prisoners, roughly?
The ones I saw they had little switch, big switch, and then body switch. These were at different times. The first one was kind of a preparatory, and also to see if they could work out the two sides doing this kind of thing. And that was wounded. And we sent them an awful lot of wounded, and they sent us some wounded. That was before I got there. The big switch was the major exchange, which I saw part of twice. And I don't know how I could give you the actual dates if I
that's fine.
but it went on, I think, probably maybe 5 weeks, something like that.
Oh, wow, okay.
Maybe a little shorter. And then after that, we want the bodies of fallen Americans desperately. And of course, you had to have the cooperation of the North Koreans.
Yeah.
The North Koreans hated our guts with good reason. And we bombed every village, everything it was desolate in the north because the U.S. Air Force just, went after them big time. So they gave us a few bodies, but that's still going on today. I mean, there is a branch of the Army, and in Hawaii, there's the major place to try to identify bones, sometimes the North Koreans would send animal bones or everything jumbled up.
Right, yeah.
It's been a mess trying to work with them, but I think just a few years ago now, they're still making exchanges. Okay, the big choice, U.S. or Japan, for my final Army year. It's rather fascinating now to recognize that I was just about the midpoint of my 3-year Army stint, and during my 5th month in Korea, I was writing to my family back home as follows. You ask me how much longer I will be overseas. I have several choices. 11 more months in Korea, then extend there for the remaining 5 months. 11 months, oh, that's funny. 11 months in Korea and 5 months either at Devens or Arlington, or finally 4.5 months in Korea and the remaining 11 in Japan at ASAPEC, which is currently much worse than basic training. The guys transferring to Korea as fast as they can. I won't have to decide until the end of March, and a lot will depend on my observations when I finally start my R&R at ASAPEC. I've always been planning to go to Japan for the remainder of my enlistment, and I did. I mean, I really did. Even though some of the reports were kind of lousy coming out of ASPAC, I gladly went. And those were really formative years for me.
Yeah? In what sense?
In what sense? Well, I'll jump to after the war. I used the GI Bill to help me go to graduate school.
Oh, wow.
And my dissertation, by the way, University of Wisconsin, was in Japan. I was 13 months in Japan doing research. This is the only picture I have of ASAPAC, but it's really, really, really interesting. It was the former, probably, I don't know. It was part of the Japanese armory. But some of these things withstood the bombing. And so it was a fairly... But the big thing is, look, Christmas time, and there's a creche there with the baby Jesus and the Holy Family and the wise men. You would never, ever, ever, ever find that nowadays.
Yeah.
But it was just, it's Christmas time, we're going to celebrate Christmas, and we have these statues, and so we'll do it.
Well, how were the Japanese, how did you find the Japanese people? I mean, literally 5-6 years prior to that, we were arch enemies. How was your interaction with the Japanese public?
Well, let me just say, when I was growing up, during World War II, I was, from the time of 1939 to 1945, I was 9 years old to 15. If it had gone on another couple years, I would have been in.
Absolutely.
But I was brought up on every Jap. The only good Jap is a dead Jap.
Uh-huh.
Oh God, and I believed it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
I'd been. He had bubblegum cards back when I was a kid. And sure, there were baseball cards, but there were also a whole series called The Horrors of War.
Really?
Ever heard of that? Incredible cards. And they were showing the Spanish War, the nationalists versus the communists, basically. They didn't call themselves that. But it was really a prequel to World War II, because the Germans were backing Franco, and the Russians were backing the people who were trying to oust Franco. Mm-hmm. Brutal, miserable, but these bright cards with stories on the back, showing like the bombing of Guernica and, whatever kind of stuff. And in 1937, maybe 1936, the Japanese bombed the USS Panay, which was a river boat armed riverboat on the Yangtze River and killed the Americans on board. And man, that's when I first started thinking. So if I was 7 years old or so, that I began to think those rotten Japanese, and then all the pictures coming out of China,
Yeah.
and the Japanese Nanking massacres, just awful. So I had a terrible view of Japan. But it's wonderful to say that, I changed my attitude 180 degrees. I mean, I became a Japanophile, you might say. And in answer directly to your question, I think only one case, I think a ticket seller in one of the railroad things was kind of surly, or at least I took it that he was. And, other than that, everybody was fine. There was nothing. I mean, everybody was helpful. And the main thing in Japan was that we were kings. I mean, we get either corporal's pay or something like that, which is pretty miserable. But we could find places where you could stay overnight at a ryokan, Japanese inn, get supper or dinner, usually quite interesting dinner, futons to sleep on all night, and breakfast for 1,000 yen. Well, that was $2.70. I mean, you had to kind of scrounge to find such a place, but a lot of them are very, very nice. So a private could walk around like, I've got a lot of money.
Wow. And I imagine you took full advantage of your time there and got quite a bit of travel in. Yeah.
Well, again, we had regular hours. Here are some orders to get from Korea to Japan, and these travel orders authorized Corporal Hough approximately 30 days TDY for ASA activities. It didn't say when we had to report. So Hutchison and I flew into Tachikawa, and they have, I don't know what they call it, like transit barracks. People who are waiting for a plane to go to such and such a other base, and they don't really check on who's in the transit barrack. So we stayed probably 5 days there, 8, and well, just had a good time. And finally we caught a plane to Kyushu. This was Brady Air Force Base. And I think we had a load of liquor on that plane. It was basically a cargo plane. And got down there. And my gosh, we went around, I don't know where my map is here. We went around Kyushu and didn't report back to ASA for a long time. I mean, we used that entire thing. But it was a case of every Saturday we had Army in the morning. We weren't, these pictures are so funny. We had, marching, and we had exercises and that kind of stuff, and probably a lecture, who knows what. But then at noon, we were free. And out of that base, into civies, and out of that base, there were about, let me tell you what my observation was, especially of the old non-coms who had been Army, or, they're in it for 20 years, something like that. I think there were 3 major groups of those. One would find a Japanese girl, live with her, shack up, and you never saw him, except maybe when he was supposed to be on duty. The second group would go to the NCO club, drink, and then drink, and then drink, and watch movies, and then drink, and then they'd stagger back to the barracks. So it didn't matter whether they were in Africa or whether they were in Alaska, they didn't give a hoot about what was going on in Tokyo, one of the most dynamic cities in the world. I went to concerts, I went to kabuki plays, I went to everything you could think of, One of the big things was the Takarazuka, all-girls, I don't know what word they used, but they had these lavish shows with, beautiful costumes and everything. And some of them dressed in top hats and looking like Fred Astaire, They were girls, but they were taking the men's roles in these plays. And so I took full advantage of everything I could.
Oh, wonderful.
I have a map of that Kyushu trip somewhere, but look, here is a picture I'm kind of proud of. Well, first of all, I'm proud of the stripes I finally got. I'll read the caption, or you can if you want to.
Okay. Richard Hough in civilian clothes, sponsored by, I'm terrible at, of an orphanage, it looks like. So it was an orphanage Christmas party.
It was arranged by us. They came to the SFAC, the whole bunch of orphans, and we were said, you be with one of them, and help him get through this whole fun of the Christmas party. So his name was Yoshiyuki Nakatsu from the Azusawa Gakuen Orphanage. Anyway, it was sponsored by us, ASA. But then when I was traveling, there were the Three Musketeers, Smutch, Huff, and Hutchison. That was a hotel that we found in Ito. And hutch under the futons. And this is the hotel itself. So they had hot springs, like
nice.
so many onsen in Japan. Travel? Oh my God, did I travel? Here's one island I got to, which is Oshima, which is in Tokyo Bay, but way out from anywhere else. And here was the hotel maid, whose name is Shizuko. And her stuff has camellias on it, I think, because that was kind of the symbol of the island. But the big thing was, she had never been to the mainland. She had never been on a train. She had never been in an elevator. She'd never, it was just, it was amazing that people were still like that, so isolated.
Yeah, right.
And this little girl is on the slopes of Mount Fuji, and she's dressed in, she had little canvas shoes and little short stockings, and she looks like she's going to Sunday school or something like that. And I went up Mount Fuji. They have the expression, he who comes to Japan and doesn't climb Mount Fuji is a fool, but he who climbs it twice is a far greater fool. Twice. And we were dressed, I won't try to show this picture, but, in boots and heavy stuff. And here are two of my guys that went with Solomon and Hutchison, just crapped out. They were so tired. It's 13,000 feet. And, but this low, and then we started down, and clump, 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 clump. And this little girl, you just wonder. And this is a picture I love. It's January 23rd, 1955. It's Mount Fuji. And it's full snow cap. And there are 5 lakes around the base of Mount Fuji. And this is the largest one of them. And it's just a place where people come, it's part of Hakone National Park. So one of the perks we had, you're talking to people who've been in combat and everything, and
Yeah.
look at me, I was having a vacation.
Right.
So that's why I didn't go to a lot of veterans things. I always felt ashamed. I mean, my classmates were there when there was actual fighting going on. I came in to about 12 days afterwards. By the time I got processed in Japan and actually flew over to Seoul. And, it counts as being Korea. I mean, they continued because they didn't know what was going to happen for a while.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, when I had a chance to go on the honor flight, I said, why? I know Washington pretty well from family and also being stationed there, for heaven's sake.
Right.
The only one I haven't seen is the World War II, and that's the biggest one, really. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go
That's good.
to
I'm
see
glad you did.
number 2. And I hadn't seen the Air Force one, but I still haven't seen it because it was such a cold day. Even with a jacket on, I was shaking. And so I stayed on the bus and had a sandwich or something. They had those box lunches.
Right.
And I could kind of see it through the trees.
Yeah.
Too big.
Yeah. So you finished up your tour of duty in Japan and came home and mustered out then, or did you still have time left in the States when you got?
No, got on a troop ship again. And whereas the Sultan was really nice, this was oh God, it was a terrible, terrible, terrible experience. Rather than the wooden decks, we had metal decks. They still made you go up there. We went via Alaska. I mean, first to Okinawa, Yokohama to Okinawa, sweltered in the heat, and then north via the northern route. And the seas were rough and the cold, it was awful. And the food was awful. It just was, it was a bad, bad, bad experience. But something really wonderful happened on it. Here it is. The ship I sailed on, the USS General Patrick. Well, they can take Patrick and stick it somewhere. It looks good there, doesn't it? We had the idea, if you haven't got it already, we were elitists. And this is 2 guys about to get off the Patrick. They woke us up about 4 a.m. in Puget Sound as we're going through the Narrows towards Seattle after coming via Alaska. And why are we working ourselves now? And I went up on deck and I was so thankful. It's one of the most beautiful picture I think I've ever seen in my life. We looked across the water and there at the Olympic Mountains, covered with snow, and there was a full moon.
Wow.
And the reflection along, and also Port Angeles is the town there, and the lights from Port Angeles, and it was just magnificent. Welcome. And then you go into Seattle, and they have big, on the dock, kind of like, I don't know where the freight is. Anyway, they have big signs, "Welcome home, heroes of Korea." And we were, what the heck, heroes of Korea. Most of the guys on that ship, we figured out, there were about 6 of us together, ASA. What's going on? And we figured they had scraped out virtually every army stockade in the Far East and emptied them and sent these guys home, you know. So it was regular army. It was really miserable. And so we just stuck together, you know, like. So we were elitists, and there was something that happened that really made, oh, I know. Headquarters 8th Army in Seoul, Korea decided they wanted to know what kind of soldiers they had, I guess, in terms of their educational levels. So they sent this questionnaire out to every unit. And ASA, our 501st Com Recon, headquarters for Korea, ASA duties, and we filled it out. I didn't, I mean, our officers didn't send it in. What? They bucked it back. They said, you must have made a mistake. You can't be that. You know, we had guys who had master's degrees. Virtually everyone had finished college, at least. No one was below high school. But they were the army. They had guys who could hardly read and write.
Yeah, right.
Some of them had made it to junior high, and that was it. So when ours came in, it was like, what? You are liars. You can't have that high bunch of...
Yeah.
So that did cement it as far as being elite, I think. I'll tell you one other story. Oh, this is kind of an interesting picture. I don't know how these are doing, but I'm bent over, looking between my legs out at some scene, and it's called groin viewing. And then the postcard over there has a Maiko, apprentice geisha, in all her robes, kimono, layer. And she's hiked them up so she can look back toward Amano Dashi. It's one of the 3 most beautiful places in Japan. And I got to the 3 most beautiful places in Japan. I got to the 3 most beautiful gardens in Japan.
Wow. What an
I
experience.
traveled. And most of it was 3rd class. Here's Amano Hashidate, the Bridge of Heaven. Japanese mythology says that the 2 gods who created Japan stood on this bridge and dipped their spears in the water and then shook them off, and that created Japan. But anyway, it's a long sandbar covered with trees. It goes just out across that tranquil harbor there. So it was worth going there, and it was worth bending down. Because what happens is you get dizzy, you know, you're lightheaded, as though the Bridge of Heaven is floating upward, maybe. At least that's what you're supposed to see. One of the places I went 2 or 3 times was Miyajima. These 2 characters, Miyajima. It is a huge decorative gateway out in the edge of the water. On these pictures, you can see me standing there when the water is out. No, the water's in when I'm standing. But then I walked out when the tide went out, and I'm standing at the base of one of those huge trunks of probably camphor wood. So the tide comes in and goes out, in and goes out, and it's a place of great beauty. Well, I was there 2 or 3 times, and many times when I led field trips from San Francisco State where I was teaching. But Wallstrom was the guy I was with at that point, and I heard that there was a hiking trail around Miyajima. The actual island is called Itsukushima, but Shrine Island, because this magnificent shrine and torii, gateway. So anyway, we started to walk. We started late, we were stupid, and it got a little bit dark, and a little bit darker, and didn't see it. And finally we were to the point where we would take a step and reach out to make sure there wasn't a tree in the way, kind of thing. So we were lost, I mean totally lost. And then, my God, we saw a light. There was a lantern. There was a light that was down below us. This is taken probably from about the same place where we found it, only we were higher than that. And we stumbled down the slope and across the fields. And it was late at night at this point, and we came to a little house and knocked on the, well, you don't knock on the door, but anyway, "Komen kudasai, komen kudasai," you know, and nobody answered. But we were sure somebody was in there, so we kept it up, and finally somebody did open the door. And our Japanese was so poor that we couldn't really communicate that way, and they knew no English at all. But finally, through sign language, we indicated that we were lost, that we would like to stay overnight, and maybe did they have a little food? So this is the woman. I went back later to do that trip again. And this elderly lady, she was the only one in that place, and she took us in and fed us and gave us a place to sleep. And this is when I went back. And then I went a third time, and she had died.
Oh.
But that was obviously her daughter, her daughter-in-law probably, and her grandchild. So that was that's a very tender memory.
Sure. Wow.
Here was a 12-day leave. I mean, 3-day pass was great. And we would get on trains in Tokyo and ride third class. Cheap. But a lot of times there were so many other people going at the same time, you know. You'd end up standing for 2 hours. Didn't matter. We were going to either to the seashore or to the mountains. Oh man, or to Nikko, or just all over. And then if you could get something like a 12-day pass, then you really moved it out. So Japan duty was pretty special and life-changing in a way. I write in here about what I was planning to do, and back and forth with my mom, and I knew I wanted to go back to Syracuse University and work on a master's degree, and I knew geography because I had taken 15 units of geography, and one of the classes I really enjoyed was geography, Asia's lands and people, or something like that, with a guy who was he was an older fellow who had been an old China hand, but he had traveled. My gosh, he wrote a book on Southwest Asia, and he shows traveling by plane, traveling by mule, traveling by, all sorts of different ways. He had covered the Arabian Peninsula and every country. That's a later thing because I was fortunate enough to get a TA ship there at the Department of Geography. It was the wrong year because this Professor Cressy, George Cressy, he had a TA the year before who had to do bibliographic work, look up all these things and try to search out different publications and all kinds of stuff. I would have been good at that. But Cressy was up to the point where he was making original maps. You sit there, get some map equipment, make a map doing of this or that. And I had had no class in that. I had no background in it, really. But I turned out some publishable maps.
Really? Wow.
Really good.
So you got your master's then in geography then?
Yeah.
And then taught it at San Francisco State?
No, that was after the doctorate.
Oh, wow. Oh, your doctorate. Jeez Louise.
No, I 2 years at Syracuse, and then almost 7 years, I think, total in Wisconsin. 2 years of classes, and you ask in one of your questions, do you have friends from the past or something like that? I met a guy from New Zealand and a guy from Australia. We're still in touch. That's been 70 years, something like that, 60 years or something like that now. And Hutchison, who was my best friend and was in my class and everything else, and he was working in the Chinese area too, died fairly young. I think he got stomach cancer or something like that, something that you wouldn't think of. That's sad, but Smutch lived for a long time. He did not go to Harvard, for instance. He could have, but he said at about 2 a.m. one morning, what the hell am I doing translating, some Latin author and or statesman or something. This is not, I'm out of here. So he quit. But he had the brains that he could have done it.
Wow.
Let me tell you something else about schooling and back to the Army Language School. I rode from Philadelphia to Baltimore. This is the first day I was in the Army, with these guys. And at least 3 of them or 2 of them were for Haverford College, which you may not have heard of, but it's very prestigious Ivy League type school in the Philadelphia area. And the one guy says to me, well, he wants, about his companion, he wants to go to the Army Language School. He told me he wants to learn Italian this weekend. I mean, he's one of these guys who's just an absolute linguist. He says he probably could do it, at least get the basics. And so he would have been the absolute prime person to go to. And that's why he joined the ASA, I'm sure. And they have that day of either disaster or of where they peg you. We want an intercept operator, we want a whatever, You can be a crippy. That's what we called ourselves. And but this guy ended up at intercept, and I bet you he was one of the worst ones ever, because he was probably so bitter for almost 2 years of his 3 years hitch. But the Army can make terrible personnel decisions somewhere along the line, and that was one that really, really was.
Wow.
So I always felt really happy that I got in something that I could handle somewhat.
Yeah. And so then post-war years, military years, you went on to a career in academia then?
Yeah.
And, How long did...
Then for the next 40 years, I guess.
Wow.
So it's something like this. Syracuse 2 years, master's, and then doctoral program was about 7, I think, because I had 13 months in Japan collecting research and information and data. And then San Francisco State, 33 years. Wow. Now, a lot of people change, in academia. They're at Oklahoma State.
Sure.
Next thing you find out, they're at Texas A&M or something like that. I stuck it out, although I was kind of like around a square peg in a round hole in a way, because it was so liberal. And I was coming from a Middle Western background and so on. And this was the time of the flower children.
Oh, right.
And they were our students. The campus, I mean, one day it was really nice. The fog had lifted because we were in the foggy part of San Francisco. And my brother was visiting from Georgia because he was in the Forest Service there. He got a doctorate too. And he walked across the campus with me, and here were these people half nude, you know. I don't know whether they were stoned or not, but they were, you know, just lounging around. And like, and he says, "Richard, what are you doing at this place?" And then the great riots, the Vietnam era riots, and a lot of campuses, Columbia, Michigan, Berkeley, San Francisco State. We were in the news virtually every day because our president at that time was S.I. Hayakawa, who is a noted linguist and had published a lot and everything. And he was kind of like famous around the United States. And he would wear a tam o' shanter hat, and he was very cocky like, you know. And some of these rioters were setting up, I could tell you about that, but they were setting up a sound truck, open sound truck right outside the campus gates, so to speak. And Hayakawa was up there and he rips the cords and everything and throws them, you know. Well, this grand gesture, you know, of fuck you.
Wow.
But it was so interesting. It was choreographed almost. You could walk into the campus. The campus was on strike. The faculty was half of the faculty was on strike, and half wasn't. And I was in the wasn't. So you walk in. There was no picket line or anything for an early class, and then it begins to build up, and then they begin to mass in the kind of big grassy plot that we had in the center of the campus, and then you begin to hear chunk, 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 the helicopters coming over, and then you begin to see at this entrance to the campus, state police, at this entrance to campus, the San Francisco tax squad, at this entrance to campus, a sheriff's posse or whatever you call it. In other words, units from all over the Bay Area would come to San Francisco State, and then they began to come in, and particularly the tax squad, San Francisco police with great, huge batons, those curved ones like the Japanese carry, and they'd come in and just start beating the protesters. I have a picture of a black guy with blood streaming down his face. You know, his whole head had been opened up with one of those things. Wow. So, but this would happen day after day. You know, at 12 o'clock, things are going to change. The helicopters will come over. The police will begin to come in, and rioters were actually coming. They wrecked the library. San Francisco State Library now has huge reinforced doors, you know, because they came in and tipped over a lot of the, what do you call it, where places where books are stacked, you know. Anyway, it was a mess.
Wow.
And in the city, of course, there were all sorts of riots going on too. So I thought of going to another place, but I didn't really.
Yeah.
I stuck it out.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll start winding down this interview. I know for a fact I only got the tip of the iceberg of your story, but is there anything that I didn't ask you, or any stories that have floated to the top as we've been sitting here that you wanted to add, so that hopefully we round it out as best we can, or do you think we captured it to your satisfaction?
I'm pleased. Of course, I've got this
Yeah.
written.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you wrote that
I have another
out.
book about 1961 when I was over there with my wife and doing research. I have another book about, I've got all these different writings about the family. This one about my father, A Forester's Life. And this one about my mom. I thought to myself, well, if I've done that for my dad, what can I do? And my God, I came up with about this many pages of
That's
stuff
wonderful.
on her. I read back on these things and I think, wow, did you really do that? Did you really write that? It's so good.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That sounds kind of like
No, yeah. What a legacy you've left by doing that.
I'm very lucky that, I had that English major
right.
background, I think. And I have always liked to write. But I really didn't do much at San Francisco State. It's really sad now to think about. But it was more of a teaching institution. A lot of guys were doing research and publishing and so forth. But basically, they were concerned that you taught well. And so
Yeah.
there's a poem here. I have no idea where Anonymous got the idea to do this, but it's called The Agency Blues. I have no idea how I got it. The day I joined the Army, I bid 3 years farewell. I fell for a line of baloney. This ASA is hell. I filled out 100 pages. I pledged 1,000 things. I waived my right to human life to please the little king. You're in the Secret Service was all I ever heard. You're above the common soldiers. It's just another word. He goes on and on and on and on. And he tries to, you can put down when you finish school, like Caribbean school, you could say you want to go to the east, Far East, or you want to go to Germany or whatever, They'd send you wherever they want to send you. So that's what this is. I got to choose, you always do in the good old ASA. This time I said Hawaii, where the hula girls dancers play. They sent me to Alaska, said I'd like it up there. Mighty pleasant roommate, that damn old polar bear. Anyway, it ends this way. 20 years later came the break in Japan, to Japan after all. But a stranger land in Uncle Sam's, to another world did call. Talking to St. Peter, he asked me what I did. 20 years in the ASA. He damn near flipped his lid. You made this trip for nothing. Now turn the other way. There's room below for everyone who was in the ASA.
I think that's a good poem to end this interview on then. So, well, Richard, I want to thank you for sitting down to tell a fascinating story today, but just as important, I want to thank you for your service to our country.